There is probably a woman in your life right now who is attracted to you and you have no idea, not because the signals aren't there, not because she is hiding them particularly well, but because no one ever taught you what to actually look for, and the things you were told to watch for are almost never the real indicators of what's happening beneath the surface. Most men spend years trying to read attraction through the loudest possible signals: the obvious glance held a beat too long, the unmistakable touch, the direct comment that leaves no room for misinterpretation. And because those are the signals they are watching for, everything quieter than that gets filed away as friendliness, coincidence, or nothing at all. But female attraction rarely announces itself that loudly, especially in women over 30, especially in situations where the stakes feel real. What it does instead is something far more interesting and far more readable once you know what you are actually looking at. There is a specific pattern of behavioral shifts that emerges when a woman is genuinely attracted to someone, a sequence. And it is happening around you right now in ways you have not yet learned to see. By the end of this video, you will. The reason you have missed this is not what you think it is. It is not that the signals weren't there. It is that you were taught to look for the wrong ones entirely. Here is what almost no one explains. Attraction does not create brand new behaviors in women. It modifies existing ones. And when you are trying to read a modification, a shift from a baseline, without knowing what the baseline actually is, you have nothing to measure against. You end up reading isolated moments without context, and isolated moments without context are almost meaningless. Think about that for a second. If a woman laughs at something you say, is that a signal? Maybe. But if she laughs at everything everyone says with the same frequency and the same warmth, then what you witnessed was not a signal, it was just her personality. The behavior itself told you nothing. What would have told you something is whether she laughed differently with you than she does with the person standing 3 feet away. This is the gap that most explanations of attraction completely ignore. Men are taught to look for behaviors. What they should be taught to look for is behavioral contrast. The question is never just what she is doing. The question is what she is doing specifically around you that she is not doing in quite the same way with everyone else. And once you shift from reading behaviors to reading contrast, everything changes. The signals become visible, the pattern becomes clear, and the uncertainty that used to sit quietly in the back of your mind after every conversation starts to resolve into something you can actually work with. Of course, this requires a little patience. It requires watching someone across more than a single interaction or across multiple moments within the same interaction. But the investment of attention is small, and what it returns to you is significant, because the alternative, guessing, misreading, walking away from something real without realizing it, has a cost too. You have already paid it more than once. Pay attention the next time she tells you something she didn't have to tell you, something small and personal that had nothing to do with what you were talking about. Before we get to specific signals, I want to establish something foundational because it will make everything that follows much easier to use. There is an order to how female attraction tends to reveal itself. It is not random. It moves through layers, from the outermost and most deniable to the innermost and most involuntary. The outermost layer is where her attention goes. The next layer is how she speaks. After that comes what her body does when the conscious mind isn't managing it as carefully. And the deepest layer, the one most men never think to look for at all, is what happens when her usual composure quietly breaks down. We are going to move through each of these layers. And I want you to notice, as we do, that the later layers are consistently more reliable than the earlier ones, not because the earlier signals don't matter, but because the later ones are harder to produce accidentally and harder to suppress deliberately. The first layer, attention, is where everything begins. When a woman feels attraction developing towards someone, one of the earliest and most consistent things that happens is that her attention reorganizes. This is not a conscious decision. It is closer to what behavioral researchers call an orienting response, the automatic shift of awareness towards something the brain has flagged as significant. You see it in infants turning toward new sounds. You see it in adults instinctively looking toward a door when someone they were thinking about walks through it. Around the person she is attracted to, a woman's attention finds its way back repeatedly, even when she is actively engaged with other people. In a group setting, you might notice that her body angles towards you while she is speaking to someone else. Her shoulders, her feet, her general orientation in space, these tend to drift in your direction without her consciously placing them there. She notices when you enter a room before most other people do. She registers when you leave. She tracks where you are in a space with a kind of peripheral awareness that goes beyond casual social monitoring. Now, you might reasonably ask whether this is simply what attentive people do with anyone they find interesting or engaging, and the answer is sometimes yes. This is where the contrast framework from a moment ago becomes essential. Watch where her attention goes with other people in the same environment. Notice whether she orients toward them the same way. Notice whether she tracks their movements with the same quiet consistency. When she does it specifically with you, more than she does it with others, more reliably than context alone would explain, that is not coincidence. That is the first signal in the sequence. The mistake most men make at this stage is that they notice it but immediately explain it away. They tell themselves she is just being attentive, just being polite, just being friendly, and sometimes that is true. But when the attention reorientation is consistent, and when it persists, even in moments when you are not the center of the conversation, it is worth noting, not obsessing over, just noting. Attention comes first, but it is the second shift, how she speaks with you, that starts to make the pattern unmistakable. We are roughly halfway through now, and I want to bring you back to something I said at the beginning, that there is a signal most men not only miss, but actively misread as something else entirely. We are building toward it. Keep that in the back of your mind as we continue. Pay attention the next time she tells you something she didn't have to tell you, something small and personal that had nothing to do with what you were talking about. When attraction is present, something shifts in the way a woman uses language. Her voice, in many cases, changes slightly. It softens, slows just enough to register, and loses the brisk efficiency that professional or casual interactions tend to carry. This is not performative. It happens at the level of vocal tone below most people's conscious awareness. But once you know to listen for it, you start to notice it clearly. What she says shifts too, and in specific ways. She begins asking questions that have nothing to do with the practical matter at hand. Questions driven by genuine curiosity about who you are rather than what you know or what you can do. She remembers details from previous conversations and references them without being prompted. Something you mentioned 2 weeks ago comes back up, not because it was important information, but because she was paying the kind of attention that only happens when someone occupies your thinking after you have left the room. And then there are the personal disclosures. These are subtle, but they are significant. When a woman is attracted to someone and is beginning, consciously or not, to build emotional proximity, she introduces small personal facts into conversations. Not confessions, not vulnerability, just small windows, something about her week, a preference she has, a thing that frustrated her, offered without obvious reason, without being asked, in a way that says, I want you to know something about me that is not required by this conversation. This is what psychologists refer to as self-disclosure reciprocity, the instinct to share personal information as a way of reducing emotional distance. And the direction it runs tells you something important. She is moving towards you. The qualifier here is important though. Some people are simply open communicators. Some people share easily with everyone. So again, watch the contrast. Is she telling you things she isn't telling others with the same ease? Is the personal warmth in her language specific to you, or is it her general register with everyone? The specificity is the signal. There are things her body does around you that she is not deciding to do, and those are the signals you should trust most. Language can be managed, tone can be adjusted, but certain physical responses happen below the threshold of conscious control, and those are the ones worth understanding most carefully. Physiological arousal, the kind that accompanies genuine attraction, produces measurable physical changes. Pupil dilation is one of the most well documented. In adequate lighting, the pupils of someone who finds another person attractive expand slightly when looking at them. This is not something anyone can choose to do or suppress. It happens because the brain releases dopamine and norepinephrine in the presence of someone it finds compelling, and the pupils respond to that release automatically. You may also notice, again in good lighting and in moments when she is relaxed, a slight flush at the base of the throat or across the chest. This is increased blood flow driven by the same neurochemical process, not embarrassment, not temperature, something closer to what happens physiologically when the body is paying very close attention to someone. What is more consistently visible than either of those, however, is self-touch. When a woman is in the presence of someone she is attracted to, she often begins touching herself in small, repeated ways, not in any dramatic sense, but in the understated gestures that accompany heightened self-awareness. She might spin a ring slowly on her finger while maintaining eye contact with you, not fidgeting randomly, but repeating the motion with a kind of half-deliberate consistency. She might touch her collarbone lightly during a pause in conversation. She might run her fingers through her hair not once, but with the same quiet repetition that signals something is happening internally. And then there is proximity. When attraction is present, women close physical distance in incremental, almost imperceptible ways, not in one obvious movement, in small adjustments, a half step closer during a conversation that started at a comfortable distance, leaning in slightly when you speak, even when there is nothing wrong with how audible you are. Orienting her body toward yours in a way that reduces the space between you without announcing the reduction. Postural mirroring is also worth noting. When a woman mirrors your body position, crosses her legs when you cross yours, tilts her head when you tilt yours, shifts her weight when you shift yours, and when that mirroring happens with a slight time lag rather than simultaneously, it is typically unconscious. Simultaneous mirroring can be deliberate. Delayed mirroring almost never is. None of these signals in isolation constitutes proof of anything. One flush, one proximity reduction, one moment of self-touch. Context explains all of those individually. What matters is the pattern across signals, across time, across situations. When several of these appear consistently in your presence and less consistently when you are not there, the pattern is no longer coincidence. It is information. There is one thing you can do without saying a word that will tell you almost everything you need to know about whether what you're feeling is mutual. This is where we move from reading signals to gently testing them, not in a manipulative way, but in the same instinctive way that human beings naturally calibrate their emotional investments in each other. Here is the principle. When two people are mutually attracted, there is an unconscious tendency to maintain a certain level of engagement equilibrium. Each person matches the other's investment to a roughly proportional degree. And when one person reduces their investment slightly, becomes a little quieter, lets a silence sit, takes slightly longer to respond, the other person's response to that reduction tells you something very precise. A woman who is genuinely attracted to you will close that gap. She will ask a question when the conversation slows. She will add something to keep the exchange moving. She will find a reason, often a very natural seeming reason, to re-engage. She does this because your reduced investment creates a small deficit she wants to close. She does not want the connection to cool, so she moves instinctively to warm it back up. A woman who is friendly but not attracted will accept the reduced energy. She will let the silence settle comfortably. She will not feel the pull to close the gap because there is no deficit in her experience. There is just a conversation winding down naturally, and that feels fine to her. This is not a test in the sense of a strategy or a game. It is a diagnostic, a way of reading something that was already there rather than manufacturing something that is not. And the important thing is that it requires almost nothing from you. You do not reduce your warmth. You do not become cold or distant or odd. You simply ease your output slightly, hold back the next comment for a beat, let a natural pause run a little longer, and watch what she does with the space you leave. What she does with that space is the answer to the question you were already asking. The mistake most men make here is never creating any space at all. They fill every silence. They carry the conversation. They match their own energy up to compensate for any lull, which means they never get to see how she behaves when the conversational weight is distributed more evenly. And so they walk away without ever having received the information that was available to them the entire time. There is one final signal left, and I have saved it deliberately. Because of all the signals in this sequence, this is the one that men most reliably misread as its opposite. If she has ever seemed slightly less like herself around you, a little more careful, a little less smooth, you may have read that completely backwards. Attraction, particularly when a woman is uncertain whether it is reciprocated, does something quietly disruptive to her normal behavior. It introduces a kind of interference into the way she moves through an interaction. And the result of that interference is that she becomes, in small and specific ways, less like her usual self. A woman who is normally a fluid, effortless conversationalist may stumble slightly mid-sentence when she is talking to someone she is genuinely drawn to, not because she is nervous in a general sense, but because she is suddenly aware of herself in the conversation in a way that she normally isn't. She is monitoring, calibrating, caring in real time about how she is coming across. A woman who is naturally confident and unself-conscious might become, around this particular person, fractionally overcomposed. Too careful, too measured, Like someone who is paying slightly more attention to how they are sitting than they normally would. Like someone who is choosing words with a precision that the moment does not technically require. These micro disruptions in her baseline behavior are not signs of discomfort in the ordinary sense. They are signs that the interaction carries weight for her. They are signs that she cares about this specific exchange in a way that most of her daily exchanges do not require her to. What psychologists call ego depletion in attraction contexts, the cognitive load that accompanies trying to present well to someone whose opinion genuinely matters, shows up as exactly this kind of behavioral irregularity. It is not distress, it is significance. The interaction matters to her, and that is precisely why her normal ease is slightly out of reach. Most men, when they encounter this, read it as disinterest, or as being intimidated by them in a bad way, or simply as an awkward personality. They do not read it as what it actually often is, a woman who is more invested in this specific conversation than she is fully comfortable revealing. This is the signal that most consistently gets walked away from. And now, you know what it actually means. Everything we have covered today connects back to a single underlying truth. Mutual attraction is never truly hidden. It leaves evidence across every layer of behavior, where her attention settles, how her language shifts, what her body does without her permission, how she responds when you ease back, and how her composure quietly adjusts when the interaction matters to her more than usual. You do not need to become someone who overanalyzes every conversation. That would be exhausting, and it would take you out of the very moments you are trying to read. What you need and what you now have is a framework, a way of seeing the whole pattern instead of grasping at individual moments and trying to make them mean something in isolation. The pattern is what matters. Single signals are interesting. Repeated signals across multiple layers are information. And information, when you have it, removes the uncertainty that used to sit in the space between what happened and what you thought it might have meant. Which one of these signals have you noticed in someone recently? And did you read it correctly at the time? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and I'm genuinely curious what you have started to see differently. If this kind of insight is useful to you, subscribing means you will not miss what comes next. Because on this channel, we go deeper than surface behavior into the psychology behind it. In the next video, I'm going to show you what happens in the window right after a woman decides she is attracted, because that window closes faster than most men realize, and what you do inside it changes everything.